Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of November. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with the Kherson district, with this area. As you can see, the map has been updated. Now it shows that this area is under complete Ukrainian control, and that the Ukrainians are started shelling and bombing the towns that located on the Russian bank of this river. And if we're talking about the Russians, they announced about the evacuation process from the 15 kilometers area from the bank of the river among civilians. The Russians are planning to keep just the military forces on this bank of the river. If we take a look at the deployment map, we're gonna see that there are a lot of Ukrainian forces in these areas. You can see a lot of mechanized brigade, our famous mechanized brigade from the Ukrainian side. There are a lot of forces there. The Ukrainian sources, the Western sources, are saying that the Ukrainians are able to redeploy around 40,000 soldiers from this bank of the river, and they're able to deploy them anywhere else on the Ukrainian front lines. Let's say they're able to deploy them somewhere around Avdiivka or South Donetsk area, or somewhere in Zaporizhia area, or the Ukrainians are able to deploy these forces on the north in Kharkiv area and to continue the offensive operation. So both sides are able to do something like this. The Russians are able to deploy, and they are planning to do this, and they're doing this right now. They're moving their forces, I believe, in direction of Donetsk, and the Ukrainians will do the same the next days. But now let's just a few more things about this area, about the situation in Kherson district, and then we're going to move to another front lines. The first thing is that more and more Russian sources are saying that because of this configuration of the front lines, the Russians will be forced to leave this land, this small area that located right in front of Achakov, this area. My projection was, if you remember, we discussed the situation a few videos ago. I told you that according to my understanding of this situation, the Russians will be forced to leave this area because of the fact that it's very difficult to support and supply this area. There are no roads in this area, there are no railroads in this area, and if we're talking about the Ukrainians, they will be able to attack this area from their bank of the river with just regular artillery systems. And according to the military situation, the Russians will be forced to leave this area, and they will be forced to live somewhere, I believe, like onto the right side of this line. So this territory might be taken by the Ukrainians during the next days. And today I got another interesting confirmation from a little bit, not the military experts, but from economy experts. Now, as you understand, there is a grain deal between Russian Federation and Western countries, and according to this grain deal, the Ukrainians are able to sell their grain and many other things, I believe, from Odessa ports to the Western countries to all over the world. And according to new agreements, according to this grain deal, the Ukrainians were planning, and the Western countries were planning and were requiring from the Russian Federation to allow them to start using the Nikolaev port as well. For now, we know that if we're talking about the grain deal, we are talking about Odessa port. But the turnover is so big in these areas, so the Western countries need to increase the base infrastructure for this situation. So that's why Nikolaev port is a part of a grain deal as well. And now the Ukrainians, starting from these days, as soon as they manage to return control over Kherson, over Snigirivka, that means that they return control over this railroad, because if you remember, this railroad was under Russian control, and Snigirivka was under Russian control. Now the Ukrainians can use the railroad in full power and to move as much as possible goods, products, grain, and many other things to Nikolaev port. And from now on, the Ukrainians are able to use two ports in this area, Odessa and Nikolaev. And this is the part of the grain deal as well. And we understand that to give Ukrainians opportunity to use another port is a very big step from the Russian side, and this was a part of grain deal. But if you take a look at the distance and the marshroute that the road that Ukrainians are able to use, they start from Nikolaev, moving to the south, and now they're right in front of territory that is under Russian control, this one. And there is a small neck that Ukrainians are able to pass, and then they appeared in the Black Sea. So this is the reason that if Ukrainians want to be on the safe side, if the Western countries want to be on the safe side, they need to force the Russians to step back from this, at least from this area. If you take a look at the Russian sources map, you're gonna see that there is a borders of the regions, and you can see that this part of the land is a part of Nikolaev district. So I believe that if there is a grain deal, if there is such a paragraphs, and if there are such paragraphs in this grain deal, I believe that if the Russians and the Ukrainians are planning to freeze the conflict, I believe that the Ukrainians will require, and the Western countries will require the Russians to leave this part of the land. And in this case, the grain road from Nikolaev to Turkey will be on the safe side, and everybody will be happy. So we have at least two reasons why the Russians will leave this bank of the river, or this land, this ground. First of all, it's very difficult to support and supply this area from the military perspective, and it's a very difficult job, and I believe there are losses. The Russian losses are going to be very high in this case. And the second one is that the Russians will be forced to leave this area as a part of the grain deal. So two things, and from one thing, yes, we understand that it's not very good for the Russians to leave this area and so on, but from another hand, we see that there is some negotiations, there is some negotiation process, there are some deals between parties, and this is the first step before the global, I believe that, peace agreement between the Western countries and the Russian Federation. So anyway, this is a very good sign that people are able to negotiate and people are able to have some deals and something like this. So not everything is not so bad. But this is from one hand, and these days, as soon as the Russians left Kherson district, we received a lot of confirmation, a lot of things that the Western countries allow the Russians to do. First of all, we understand that the Western countries reduced their sanctions against the Russian oil. I believe you heard some updates from India that the United States of America is okay with Indians, they're planning to buy oil, the high prices, and so on. And other things that the Russians haven't lost their access to the precious metal market and something like this. Furthermore, we know about that there are a lot of ships all over the world with the Russian fertilizers that were arrested, and now the situation has been fixed and so on. So as a result of the grain deal from the Russian side, they achieved also a lot of benefits, a lot of success. Now they have access to the Western's finance, to money, and so on. So everybody is happy, believe me. And the Russians left Kherson, and believe me, yes, maybe they lost some kind of territories, but that was some kind of a very nice step from their side, showing that they're ready for negotiation. From the other side, they achieved access to the Western markets, and they achieved access for the Western money, and this also, everybody is happy, business is business. And now let's talk a little bit about the Zaporizhia and other front lines. If we're talking about Zaporizhia front lines, there are no changes in this area. And if we're moving a little bit to the east, to Donetsk, there is our famous Ugledar, Pavlovka. The Russians reported that Ukrainians made few attempts of counteroffensive operation in direction of Volodymyrovka, Pavlovka, Mykolska, and Stepnoye. So they were trying to, it's like some kind of active type of defense, and the Ukrainians were trying to attack and not to allow the Russians to do any attack from their side. And as a result of those attempts, the Ukrainians lost around 85 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles. As you can see, the Russian source map has been updated. Now it shows that the Russians controlled the entire Pavlovka, and Nikolskoye was controlled by the Russians before, and so on. And if you remember, I told you that if there is some kind of deal between Western countries and the Russian Federation, I told you that the Russians left Kherson, but I told you as well that now we are going to see the next weeks that the Ukrainians would leave some towns in Donetsk district. If we are talking about the previous 48 hours, we can say that the Ukrainians left Pavlovka completely, yes, with heavy clashes, with battle. They had losses there, and maybe I'm not even sure that retreating from Pavlovka was a part of big deal between Western countries, but at least we see this. Furthermore, these days we receive update that the Russians had some development in Marinka. Marinka is still in the Ukrainians. It's just, I believe, that the regular situation. But another important update are coming from Piesky front line. And these days, during the previous 24 hours, we got final confirmation, and it's like 100% real information, that Ukrainians left Oputne, this town. For now, the Western source map is not updated, but I have updated already. On this map, as you can see, this is Oput now, this territory that is under Russian control. And this is a very difficult and critical situation for the Ukrainians, because now we understand that there are no more towns between Avdiivka and the Russians. And as you can see, even from this configuration, you see that Avdiivka at least is in the back or half encircled, and there are not much ways how supply and support this area. And now the Russians, of course, as we discussed, will try to complete their operation in direction of Nitailova and in direction of Toninka. So they will try to encircle this area, and I believe that they will try to complete this mission by the end of this year. Furthermore, we see that the Western sources map has been updated in direction of Nivoyska. The Russians are getting closer to this town. So I'm not saying that this is a part of a big deal, but anyway, as you can see that after during the Kherson offensive retreat operation, defense operation, evacuation operation, yes, the Russians achieved success, at least if we're talking about this area, in Pavlovka region and in Oputne. And Oputne is very fortified position. The Ukrainians have been building this fortified position since the 2014, so it's a very big fortification, powerful area, and now the Russians penetrated and they're developing their offensive operation. Furthermore, if we're talking about other front lines, today we got update that the Russians finally established control over this position, Mayorska. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, they have updated their map. As you can see now, for now they're showing that at least half of Mayorska, this station, is under Russian control. The second area and territory is in the gray zone. But I believe that in a day or two we're going to see that this entire area will be colored in red, showing us that this territory is under complete Russian control. Furthermore, the Russians reported that they managed to develop their offensive operation, develop their bridgehead in direction of Azarevka, Kurdyumovka, Klishevka, so they're pushing. And the Ukrainians slowly, but they're stepping back. Maybe the Ukrainians stepping back in a slow mode because, try to reduce the understanding that it might be some kind of deal. Because I believe that if there is a deal, I believe that nobody wants that anybody knows about this deal. Mainly I'm talking about civilians. Of course, they want to hide this because I believe that both parties are planning to continue some kind of offensive operation, because the Russians, they still need to get control over Donetsk region and to push the Ukrainians as far as possible from Donetsk and to stop the shelling of this town. And furthermore, these days we also got report that the Russians completely established control over Bakhmutska. So as you can see, the Ukrainians got control over entire Kherson district. Now they're able to use the Nikolaev port. From the Russian side, there are a lot of restrictions were reduced in financial sphere, and furthermore the Russians managed to take control over some number of towns along the front line with the Ukrainians. If we are talking about these towns, and I told you before that yes, I believe that during the next weeks we're going to see this picture that Ukrainians are forced to step back from some local towns. I believe that maybe by the end of this month the Russians will be able to take control over Ugledar, the Russians will be able to take control over Novomikhalovka, maybe the Russians will push the Ukrainians from Marinka. Even by the end of this year, the Russians will be able to get control over Nivoyska, Pervomaiska, Vadiana, Oputne will be cleared, maybe the Russians will be entered Severne, and maybe the Russians will short the front line on Bakhmut by taking like Azaryanovka, Kurdyumovka. So, and there would be clashes, at least we will see clashes, but from all those clashes, the Ukrainians will be step back, and at some certain time, the Ukrainians will stop. And now the Ukrainians are not breaking anything. I believe this, that everything is according to the plan. So we're going to step back, but believe me, at some certain point, the Ukrainians, as soon as they will be able to redeploy the forces from Kherson district somewhere here, and in Donetsk area, in Zaporizhia area, they will stop this situation and they will break the deal. And after, don't think that the Russians don't understand this. The Russians understand this very well. Everybody understands this. I believe that the Western countries understand this as well. But for now, there is like 2-3 weeks of some period of time while the Ukrainians will be forced to follow the deal. Maybe if the Russians will give control over this land during the weeks, they will be able to prolong this period, and the Ukrainians will continue stepping back from some territories in Donetsk. But as soon as the Ukrainians are able to establish some positions in this area, it's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians will be able to move a lot of forces here to build bridgehead in this area that they are able to use to attack or develop. But at least they will be able to have some positions and to save their ships that moves from Nikolaev. But as soon as they do this, they will break the deal, and then we're going to see a totally different phase of this special operation. We see that during the previous weeks the Russians were stepping back, and I'm not sure how this situation is going to end. But anyway, I'm not sure that the Russians are going to complete or finish. Tell the truth, it's very difficult to understand what are in their minds. Now let's talk about Kharkiv, LPR district, Kupiansk frontline. As you can see, there are a lot of icons. The Ukrainians made the same attacks, the same attempts in direction of Kuzyomovka, in direction of in this area, the Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Plashanka, in direction of Chervonopopovka from Makeyevka, and as a result, this Liman front line, and as a result of heavy clashes on this front line, the Ukrainian lost around 350 soldiers from Liman to Kupiansk on this front line, and something around 27 armored vehicles in this area. We got a lot of reports from the Russian sources that says that Ukrainians don't count their losses, that there are a lot of foreign forces in this area. Mainly there are a lot of forces from Polish speaking language forces and so on. And the Ukrainians plans to develop, no matter the deals, no matter the negotiation process. I believe that these tracks doesn't have any points where they're crossings. Business is business, war is war, and the parties are planning to develop maybe this situation in this direction. I hope that by the end of this year the parties are going to freeze this conflict, and they're not planning to unfreeze this conflict the next year. But something tells me that first of all, this is a very good business for somebody. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.